Welcome to the Thrive TV show with Lauren Parsons, helping you boost your health, energy, and productivity.
Kia ora koutou and welcome to another episode of the Thrive TV show. I'm Lauren Parsons, your host, and today I'm joined by Rhadika Dutt, all the way from Boston in the US, and we're talking about why goals and targets backfire and what actually works instead. So it's such a joy to have you here, Radhika.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, welcome. We're going to dive into three things. We're going to focus on diagnosing the negative side effects of goals and targets. Right, is going to share with us how to learn how to drive experimentation, learning, and adaptation in your organization through her OHLA methodology, OHLA. Looking forward to hearing what that is. I'm very curious. And also talking about how you and your team can thrive by shifting the focus from performance evaluation to performance development. So before we dive into that, I would love to go over my this and that questions, if that's okay.
Sure.
So to kick off, tell me cats or dogs?
Dogs.
Dogs. Okay.
Allergic to cats, so
Oh, that is sad. Oh, I'm a
it
both.
is a bummer.
Yeah, okay. What about beachfront or mountaintop?
Mountaintop. The
Okay.
serenity and silence. I can just imagine myself meditating.
Okay, nice. Fresh salad or cooked veggies?
Fresh salad.
Okay. And on the food theme, chocolate or cake?
Oh, chocolate.
Okay. And would you rather go a week without your car or a week without the internet?
Oh, a week without my car. I lived in Singapore for 2.5 years and I was so thrilled to not have a car for that time.
Okay, nice, wonderful. So, Rhadika Dutt is the author of Radical Product Thinking, the new mindset for innovating smarter, which introduced a methodology that's now used in over 40 countries. She is an entrepreneur, a speaker, and a product leader who has participated in 5 acquisitions, 2 of which were companies that she founded. Radhika has built products in a wide range of industries, including broadcast, media and entertainment, telecom, advertising technology, government, consumer apps, robotics, and even wine. She graduated from MIT with an SB in MEng in electrical engineering, and she speaks, get this, 9 languages. I think this has so impressed me when I first met you. Amazing. Can we just zero in on that? Can you tell me what's the backstory to the 9 languages?
Um, Languages I've discovered are really a portal to understanding culture. You can't really understand culture without knowing language. And so, yeah, it's always fascinated me ever since I was little. I have never lived in a place where they speak my mother tongue ever since, in all my conscious memory. And
Wow.
so, because I moved a lot, every time I would move somewhere, you'd learn something because of the language about the culture. And so that's what got me to learn all these languages.
Wow. So you grew up in India, that's right?
Yes, I lived there till I was 12. And
Yes.
then we moved to South Africa. Momentous times, moved there in 91, right after apartheid laws were abolished, until 95, when the first democratic elections happened.
Wow.
Um, and then moved to the US for undergrad. And then I've lived here since, except for a 2.5 year stint in Singapore. But my husband's from Italy, so I have Italian citizenship. So I'm a little bit from everywhere.
Okay. Wonderful. Oh, so lovely. So exciting. I would love to hear, can you just start by sharing a bit about how did you get into what you're doing now?
Yeah. So my background, like after studying electrical engineering, right after that, like right actually while we were still in our dorm rooms at MIT, we started a company called Lobby 7. And that all sounds so glamorous. Yeah, these college kids starting a company and got funding and blah, blah. But the reality was, we just made so many mistakes. And this is so common, right? These are the kinds of mistakes that we make when we're building products, when we're building companies. And that's what led me to realize that these product diseases that make good products go bad, they are so common. And so I talk about them as product diseases so that we can just talk openly about them because there's no shame in admitting that there are these product diseases.
Mhm.
And the learning is, what can we do better to avoid those product diseases so that we can build world-changing products really systematically? And so that's what led me to writing this first book, Radical Product Thinking, which is behind me. And when I say product diseases, what I mean, and I'll give you the example of that startup that we had, we caught what I now call hero syndrome
Mhm.
because our vision was revolutionizing wireless. And if you ask me, like, what did that mean? 25 years later, I still don't know. We were just all about going big and scaling. It was the focus on how much funds we had raised, etc. But we weren't really thinking about what's the problem that we're setting out to solve. So that's what led me to radical product thinking. And in terms of what led me to what I'm working on now in terms of goals and targets and why they don't work, what I've realized is a lot of people were reaching out to me saying, you know, I'm trying to implement what you're saying in radical product thinking, thinking long term, thinking about my vision, how to implement it in everyday actions. But the reality is, my company is driven by goals, targets. It's all about the short term. I can't possibly implement these things when I have all these short term things to think about and to hit. So, what do I do? And I realized that it's not just me seeing issues with goals and targets, that it was an issue everyone else was seeing. And that's what led me to where I am today.
Okay, so interesting. And I think it's quite a controversial topic, to talk about goals and targets. People talk about New Year's resolutions and you've got to set a goal. And a lot of people have fears around setting goals, fear of failure, fear of success. I'm really intrigued, and it's really great having different contrasting points of view because in lots of ways I love vision and goals and clarity. So I'm really excited to unpack more about this. And I think you've got some unique terminology. I hadn't even heard of this idea of product diseases before. So thank you for unpacking that. So tell me, first up, quick question. What's the short answer on goals? Are goals good, bad? Give me a bit of an overview.
I want to unpack what you said actually, which
Yeah.
is vision, clarity, goals. I separate those things.
Okay.
Vision, good. Goals, bad.
Okay.
Clarity, good. Targets, bad. So
Okay.
that's, I think, how I would frame it. That we need clarity, we need vision. Goals and targets, they give you the illusion of clarity. They don't actually give you clarity. Why do I say that? The big thing with goals and targets is when you set that this is a goal or target for your team, the incentive you create for your team is to show you, ta-da, I've hit that goal or I've hit that target. What happens is that they want to prove to you that this initiative is working or that they want to look like this high performer and look, I've hit whatever number you wanted. And this is not malicious. Of course, you want high performers, but what it creates is it makes you look at the good numbers and set aside the bad numbers. It makes you want to show the good numbers and say, ta-da, I've hit those numbers. And those bad numbers, you're sort of just sweeping them under the rug. Whereas as a leader, what you really need is you need people to look at those bad numbers and say, huh, I wonder what's happening. Is this a
Okay.
problem? Is this an opportunity? You need them to play detective and figure out what's going on, not just sort of sweep them aside, right? And that is the problem with goals and OKRs or targets, whatever we want to call it, that it leads to just the wrong mindset. It's a mindset of proving success as opposed to questioning.
Okay, and I love the power of curiosity. So I want to pick up on that piece so what you're saying is that yes, have clarity, have vision, but when you set the small specific targets, what that does is it leads us to go, okay, I've got to hit this revenue target or this sales target or this turnover target or whatever the target is. And you're saying that then we focus on trying to prove that and maybe don't pay attention to some of the other, maybe the expenses are running over, or maybe there's not a very good ROI in this area of our business. Okay, so how do we apply this? How do people shift and tell me, do you mean that all goals are gone? Like I'm just trying to black hat think this. Do I listen to this and then go, okay, I should stop having goals? Tell me a bit about that.
Yeah, that would sound really scary to a leader. One day to the next, drop what you're doing, do this instead, right?
Mm.
So here's one way to think about it. Let's take the example of sales, which you brought up. You might be hitting sales targets, but maybe in doing that, you're taking on lots of custom work and, margins are really crappy. You might still hit targets. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's good for business. So how might we think about it differently? So instead of setting just a target which says, we want to hit X million by the end of this year, you might set a puzzle. And the puzzle might be, we do want to hit X million by the end of the year, but I'm seeing this puzzle or an observation, first of all, to start with. And the observation is sales grew in the last 3 years, and now sales have plateaued in this last year. And I don't know why that is happening. Like, I have some ideas, but I don't have concrete proof on what exactly is happening, right? It's, first of all, I'm going to be open to questions. And so I'm going to ask these questions to explore the problem. So here are some guiding questions. Is it that the market has shifted in ways that maybe we haven't adapted to it? Maybe it's something around AI. We haven't figured out what's going on. Maybe it's that in terms of sales, we knew how to sell to the early adopter, but we haven't figured out how to sell into the mass market. Or maybe the product lies in terms of how we had built our product, that we knew how to address the needs of that early adopter, but we hadn't figured out how to address the needs of the mass market. And these are questions I might genuinely not know the answers to as a leader, and I invite my team into setting this puzzle. And the objective out of that OHLA framework, the O stands for objectives.
Okay.
And that objective is summarizing the puzzle, which is how do we solve this puzzle and get back to that growth trajectory that we wanted to? Okay. And by the way, moving from goals to this sort of puzzle setting is like catnip for your team, for the high performers.
Okay, so they're going to love it. Yeah. Can you unpack for us this OHLA, so OHLA? Can you run through what each of those are and give us some definitions?
Yeah. So the O is for objectives, then it's hypotheses, learnings, adaptations. Okay. And so we just talked about the O for puzzle setting. And the way you set the puzzle is through the 4 O's. So the first is the observation or the problem. Mm-hmm. Then the second O is the open questions. What are the open questions that help us explore this observation or problem? Okay. And the third thing is, what is the opportunity? Like, by unlocking this problem, what opportunity can we arrive at? And then finally, what does this mean for an outcome? And in this case, it's getting back to that growth curve that we were hoping to get to.
Okay. And can I just ask for people that are listening in, does this only apply in businesses and product-based businesses, which I understand is your specialty? Does this also relate, to our lives? I'm just thinking for individuals that are perhaps got a vision for their life and then perhaps breaking that down into goals or targets. Is this transferable? Tell me about this at a personal level.
Oh, I love this question. It very much is about a personal level too. I like to often give the example that, society pushes us towards goals and targets, even in our personal lives. It pushes us to chase numbers, whether it's compensation numbers, job titles, working at a specific sort of company, the number of followers we have, right? It's all sorts of goals and numbers it pushes us towards. And when we step back and we think about the puzzle of life and what is it that we want to solve for, and think about what is fulfilling for us, right? What are the observations about our own lives, the open questions in terms of like, what is fulfilling for us? What brings us joy? These are the kinds of things that we can even think about in our personal lives. And frankly, for me, I've been thinking a lot about how even in our personal lives, how do we stop chasing things? I feel like you've seen in my whole career, it's a lot of this high achieving, constantly chasing the next thing. Mm-hmm. But, sometimes that can come from a toxic drive too. And the puzzle mindset helps you center it on what is it that you want?
Okay. So if I am, partway through my career and I can relate perhaps to this, which I could certainly can, ambitious, driven, goal setting, like you achieve one goal, then it's like, what's next? One of my favorite TED Talks of all time is by Sean Aker, where he talks about the secret to happiness, or the happy secret to better work, it's called. And he talks about how we think that success leads to happiness, but actually that formula is backward and broken, because whenever we succeed at something, we just set the bar higher. It's like, oh, you've won this award. Oh, you've done this, you've done that. And we go, we don't take enough time to, I think, celebrate, and we just think, right, what's next? So how do we apply this, this puzzle mindset and bring this curiosity into our lives? Give me like a practical example.
Yeah. And this goes to the puzzle solving part too, right? So let's
Yeah.
talk about, first of all, by setting the puzzle, it's forcing you into the question mindset as opposed to having goals in your life, like, I have to chase these things. It
Okay.
makes you question things, first of all, because of the puzzle. And
Yeah.
the second piece of this is as you solve the puzzle, a lot of it relies on reflection. So let's talk about what I mean by puzzle solving. So the hypotheses, learning, adaptations, that's a bit dry. When I talk about puzzle solving, it's really three questions I think about, right? And hypotheses, learnings, adaptations relates to these three questions. So the
Mhm.
first question is, whatever your first attempt is at solving that puzzle, the first question you ask is, how well did it work? And you don't just invite, did you or didn't you hit this target? You invite both the good and the bad, right? How well did it work? It's not a binary question.
Yeah.
Let's say, your what you were thinking about was how can I be more active? I really want to get into maybe, I've always wanted to run a marathon. And the puzzle was, how can I be more active? If I wanted to run a marathon, how might I go about that? Is this something that would really bring me joy? And
Yeah.
so you figured out this puzzle for yourself. Maybe this brings me into a social group of activity in running, etc., that I enjoy. I've always wanted to do that. And maybe that is the puzzle you wanted to figure out, right? And so here's your first attempt at this. Maybe it's that you want to find a group or you want to find some sort of a training program for how do I get into doing a marathon?
Mhm.
And you ask this first question. So, how well is it working? And this is where the reflection part comes in. You have some sort of a hypothesis and you reflect and you see how well is it working? And then the second question is, what did I learn from it? And this is where I say, let's not just spit out a bunch of numbers and look at dashboards and, I ran X number of miles. It's also the reflection, right? In terms of what is this? What are the learnings from this? Maybe part of the learning is, oh, I'm so much more motivated when I'm running with people. Or maybe your learning is, this is so helpful in my work life when I go running. Whatever those learnings are, there might be numbers associated with it, but there's also reflection that tells you the story behind it, right? And that story part is so important that we forget,
Mhm.
especially when we're chasing one thing after another. And then comes the last question, which is the adaptation question. What will you try next based on how well it worked and what you've learned? And this is where, it might be that you find that maybe your learning was you really enjoy doing this with someone, not alone. Or your learning is, I like to do this alone, whatever it is. But what are you going to do next based on those learnings? So this is one way to apply it, right? But this is just as applicable in that sales example, using those same questions of how well did it work? What have we learned? What will we try next? And it brings the focus to reflection and which makes you stop, celebrate, and also look at what worked, didn't work, and then what would you want to do next?
Yeah, fantastic. I just love the power of reflection. And I love how this takes, rather than saying, here's the goal, XYZ, boom, we're going to try and do this, it flips it on its head to really evoke curiosity. And your example just reminds me of several years ago. I did a course actually with a group to run a half marathon. And it was amazing. And I reflect back on that time. And interestingly, just before you started talking about it, I was picturing this scenario for people. Like, what if you want to get fit and active? I have a friend that I run with, and it's been making me reflect on, oh, what is it? And lately I've been thinking we should really do an event. And we just haven't. Like, we've been running together for about 3 years now. And we've never signed up and actually done an event. And it's making me reflect on, do we need to do an event? Because actually, the thing that I love most is that we connect, we have these amazing conversations, even when it's a bit darker, a bit colder, a bit windy. It's just the best way to start the day with an early morning run. Um, so I love this giving permission to ask the great open questions, like you said, not binary yes, no questions, but what have we learned? So, so powerful. And just the power of curiosity and great questions. I think this is, as you say, so applicable in people's personal lives, but again, in our workplaces, in our careers. What is it that's fulfilling? We've got to actually pause. And I often talk about, I do a lot of leadership development, and there are these birds called keriru, the native New Zealand wood pigeon. A lot of them around my home, and they do this amazing thing, Radhika, where they fly and then they fly almost vertical and they pause and just hover for a moment, and then they head off with this amazing acceleration. And I always say to leaders, we've got to master the power of the pause, to pause and reflect and decide actually which direction do you want to head off in, because we can just be running in a direction that's not maybe serving us or others around us. So yeah, interested to
Oh
hear.
my gosh, that's such a beautiful analogy. I love it.
So, for people that are listening in who are going, okay, I've got this oh no, OHLA process now. What's sort of the next step? What's something that you would recommend people to do to be able to use this in their lives?
Yeah. So first of all, you asked me earlier, do I have to drop goals if I'm a leader? And one thing that you can see now that you heard about this OHLA approach of puzzle setting and puzzle solving, you know, you can just de-emphasize goals a bit just so that people will give you the truth in terms of what's actually happening, right?
Okay.
If you de-emphasize goals, but even de-emphasizing goals feels scary. So as a leader, one thing you can do right away is you can use this OHLA approach even to role model for your team, just this sort of reflection. So take an initiative that you've worked on, and you could present it to the team in this format of what was the puzzle we were solving, and then what was what were the answers to how well did it work, what have we learned, what will we try next.
Yeah.
And by presenting information in this way, right, there's vulnerability in it for you because you're having to talk about both the good and the bad, the learnings, what you would do next. But you're role modeling for the team that it's okay to do that. And therefore,
Wow.
it is really okay to share the good and the bad with me. You're creating that psychological safety for your
I was just
team.
going to say, this is like just another lens on psychological safety, making it okay to ask those questions. How did it go? What did we learn? Which I think is just, one of the most important leadership questions to constantly be asking. And especially during challenges, during things that don't seem to go well or something that we feel is a failure or a misstep or a catastrophe even, to go, whew, okay, what did we learn? And as you say, how are we going to adapt? What are we going to do now? So I love this. So powerful.
Thank you. I'm really glad that this resonates, right? And this is exactly what I've found where when you talk about, when you talked earlier about the curiosity, as a leader, we often think that I need to set goals for my team because they need to be motivated. We rely on this external motivator.
Okay.
And what I've actually found is it is amazing how puzzles are a different motivator altogether. So I'm going to try a live experiment on you right now,
Yeah.
Let's see how this works.
Right.
So I'm going to give you two questions, and you just have to think about what are your feelings at the end of each question,
Okay.
right? And compare those feelings. So the first question is, what are your goals for your business this year? What are your goals?
Okay. And do you want me to just think about how I feel or you want me to answer it?
Just think about how you feel.
Okay. Yep.
And the second question, what are the puzzles you want to solve for your business this year?
Okay. So my gut feeling is with the goals, there was partly sort of this fear, worry, oh, am I going to meet the goals? But also maybe a balance of excitement and drive. Okay, so this mixture. And when you talk about the puzzles, I think because this is a new concept for me, there was initially like confusion. but also openness and what was the other word? Whether it was just curiosity, but yeah, mostly just openness. And I think my brain started going towards, what are the problems that I want to solve for people, as in how do I want to help people, which I think relates to, one of the biggest philosophies I believe in is how do you want to add value? Like how do you want to add value to your personal relationships? How do you want to add value, like leave a profit behind wherever you go, whether it's just wiping down the counter in the ladies' bathroom before you leave, or how do you want to add value? Because I think if we're all adding value, that's ultimately going to lead to business success, relationship success, all these things. So yeah, interesting.
And so this, what you just described, right, is so interesting that this is the same pattern I see in people every time I've ever tried this experiment in workshops, etc.
Yeah.
And one observation in even how you describe goals versus puzzles, all the words that you used, right? I hear them always in every experiment I've tried. That the first one, goals, creates this feeling of anxiety, being evaluated. And the second one, puzzles, it creates this feeling of curiosity, right? And openness. But there's a second piece to this. I don't know if you noticed, you talked a lot more about things that you wanted to do. You came up with a lot many more ideas for like, oh, what problems? Like a lot of your answers came from this internal drive about what you want to do, as opposed to goals often feel like what you have to do. It's this drive and how you're pushed versus this in puzzles is this internal drive. And which is why I talk about puzzles as a way of driving energy from the inside as opposed to sort of pushing yourself.
Mm.
Which is an amazing shift. And this is what I see when I work with teams, that teams are a lot more motivated when I can frame the puzzle. We're all aligned and, ooh, this is the puzzle we want to solve. And then I can start to see how we're solving those puzzles. And what is fascinating to me is, right, when I describe this process of what have we learned, how well did it work? What have we learned? What will we try next? The what will we try next often is the start of the next puzzle,
Yeah.
because that leads me to that next round of reflection and, oh, I'm going to try this next. How well did that work, etc. Right? But it's not exhausting like goals. Goals creates this exhaustion of there's always this next thing I'm chasing after. And after each sort of sprint, you're exhausted afterwards. Whereas because this comes from an internal drive and I'm solving the next puzzle, I am motivated from within. I don't feel like I am exhausted after each one. Like I want to keep going because I've found this new thing that I want to solve.
Mm. This is so fascinating, and it's just, again, my mind keeps jumping to, so what do we do with goals? Like, do we let them go altogether? And like you say, it feels scary, you imagine a leader so am I telling my sales team that they no longer have targets? Or am I telling my customer service team that they no longer have to get a certain percentage of positive outcomes or positive reviews or all of these things? So again, at a really practical, tangible level, how do we overcome those fears for people? How do they practically introduce this whole idea of puzzles without confusing people?
Yeah. And so for your company, the clarity might come from if you have market expectations where you have to hit certain revenue targets, etc. You might have to share those targets. So you still say, look, we need to hit X million by the end of this year. But creating that openness around what is the puzzle? What is the problem to be solved? What is inviting the good and the bad in this format, like getting teams to present information to you in that format of how well did it work? What have we learned? What am I going to try next? And so the way you can use this is you don't necessarily have to drop targets on day one at all. You might choose never to drop targets, but just know that the more you make the team feel evaluated, the less they're going to share the honest truth in terms of, what is happening in the field. So your challenge as a leader is how do you create that space so that people will give you the truth in terms of how well did it work? What have I learned? What will I try next? And what you want to see from this truth is there might be one person on the team who is new to the team, let's say, they don't have as much in terms of the knowledge, skills, or experience in terms of solving the puzzle. And you see that from their answers, and you might give them more scaffolding. Whereas someone with more experience, knowledge, or skills, you observe, oh, I see that they're really super good at solving this puzzle. I'm going to give you the bigger puzzle. I see you need less handholding. Just come back and tell me when you need my help. Off you go. So depending on who it is on your team, you can give them the scaffolding and give them different levels of scaffolding and handholding based on how well they're able to solve the puzzle. But by giving them this approach, right, you start to see who is how good at actually solving this puzzle. Don't make them feel evaluated. Give them handholding and coaching instead. And that'll give you both the real answers, but it also moves you from this mindset of performance evaluation all the time and quantifying performance to performance development.
Okay, I was just going to ask you that exact thing that you've used these two terms you've mentioned. So, how do you define performance evaluation and performance development? And I'm particularly interested to hear what is this performance development?
Yeah. So performance evaluation is when, in most companies, it is this huge desire and a drive to quantify performance. And so there's this drive to say, okay, you are on a scale of 1 to 5 in terms of performance, you are a 5, you here, you're a 3. Here's what I need you to do to get from a 3 to a 5. But it's constantly putting numbers, right, to that.
KPIs,
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And how does this manifest, right, in terms of how people actually behave? So there was someone who was sharing with me that he used to work in customer service. And the KPI for that team and how you were evaluated, whether you're a good performer or not so good, was by seeing how quickly are you able to close the tickets that were coming in, the support tickets.
Okay.
So how did that manifest? There was one woman on the team who was always monitoring the queue for what were the easiest questions that came in the queue, and she would quickly pick up that question and add it to her queue.
Okay.
And so if you looked at her stats,
working the system because they're trying to just, this is so true, isn't it? That whatever we focus on, whatever we measure, we're driving behavior in that direction. We've got to be so careful about what other things we're measuring. Yeah.
exactly. And so in this case, right, she kept picking the easiest questions. Her stats looked fantastic, but was she a great performer? Actually, no. It was the people who were answering the hardest questions, right? Their performance was really good. But to this, a lot of people will say, oh, this just means, set the right incentives. But whatever your incentives are, the highest performers are very often the smartest people. And it's like saying, why wouldn't these people engineer whatever their numbers are to hit whatever numbers you want them to hit? They're the highest performers. They will know how to hit those numbers. But honestly, this is where it kills motivation, because when you care about your work, and that was the case with this person who still remembered this customer service example decades later, they were saying it killed teams' motivation, because everyone who cared about the job, who cared about the customer, they were observing this woman and feeling like, this is what gets rewarded. And so what you want to do as a leader is, instead of focusing on this quantifying performance, you want to drive better performance. What you want is that performance development, improving performance. And one thing that research shows is that the more people feel evaluated, the less open they are to taking feedback.
Ooh, interesting. Okay, the more people feel evaluated, the less open they are to feedback, which would help them grow. Okay, tell me more.
And isn't that interesting, right? And we can see this in performance reviews. How often has it happened? Our listeners can think back to experiences. You're trying to give your team feedback, give a person feedback, and you tell them, this is what I observed in last Wednesday's meeting. Maybe this is something you could change in how you approach things. And they go like, oh, but you misinterpreted last Wednesday. This was what was happening, right? This defensiveness. Why does that happen? Why that defensiveness? Because there's that fear that this is what is going to make the difference from me being a 4 versus a 5, right?
Okay. And I'm not going to get my bonus, or I'm worried about defending my patch of turf, or yeah, okay.
exactly that, that level 4 versus a 5 is going to mean that difference between a promotion or not, that bonus or not, right? And then I get defensive about what it is that you might have in terms of feedback for me. But if you look at who we are as humans, what drives us is learning and growth. We want to grow as people, right? And so if we take off this evaluation, and this is what research shows, that when people don't feel evaluated, they want that feedback. They want to learn from you and know, what can I do better? And so fascinatingly, what I found is when I'm working with teams, I can drive them a lot harder by actually using this approach of puzzle setting and puzzle solving, because then I'm able to give them very direct and honest feedback. I was working with a product manager. Their answers to that column of what have I learned? I was listening to the answers and going like, but have you thought of this? And you say 48% of our users are doing blah, but is that because they land on that landing page, or is that because they came back to it? And they were like, oh, I don't know. Well, that would tell us what is actually happening, as opposed to just you're telling me that stat of 48%, right? So I'm able to push the team harder and give them very honest and direct feedback, because I'm not constantly making them feel evaluated. I want them to be better at what they're doing. I'm able to give them feedback on, I see that in terms of adaptation, you want to try this experiment next, but that's a huge risk to the business. Could we do that in a smaller way so it's a smaller risk? All of this sort of pushing that I can do with a team, the more they feel like I'm on their side. This is about developing them as performers, as leaders, etc. The less they feel evaluated, the more they want to take my feedback.
This is just so fascinating. I feel like it's flipping people's paradigms or flipping, a lot of approaches on its head. So to summarize some of the key things that have really stood out to me is what you're saying is that goals and targets tend to drive anxiety and people feel evaluated, and the research shows that actually lowers their performance. Whereas if we can bring a curiosity mindset, if you can create cultures with really high psychological safety where it's very normal to ask questions like, how did that work? That evaluation cycle, what did we learn? How are we going to do this differently? What might we do next time? And just continually, run that cycle, then you're actually going deeper than just saying, here's the stat. You're going, what is driving this stat? And I guess I'm just picturing just leading to more creativity, more innovation, again, through that shared ideas.
And you're exactly right. And it leads to more innovation and actually better business results. So I've been using this. This is just one example at a company where we changed from setting OKRs and goals to
Sorry,
this
what are
mindset.
OKRs? I don't
Objectives
understand.
and key results. It's another
Okay.
methodology for goal setting.
Okay.
But they were using this approach, and it's what Google talks about as, this is our secret to success, etc. It's all about setting targets using this methodology called OKRs, objectives and key results. And this company, for example, had been using OKRs for setting their goals and targets. And, when I was brought in to work with a team, I was brought in because sales had stalled in 2023. And no matter whether they were hitting or not hitting those targets, it wasn't clear, well, what do we do differently? Right? And so we applied this puzzle setting and puzzle solving mindset, and there was continuous just improvement. We stayed focused on the problem space for longer to really evaluate what is the problem. And then we could figure out solutions and reflect, learn, adapt. Right? And by doing that, we doubled sales in 2024 and again in 2025. And we dropped customer churn from 26% to 4%. And so everything that I talk about, it's not just something that we do to make people feel better or motivate people. It really drives better results in terms of what people end up doing.
Amazing. Amazing. Thank you so much for your time and just for so many insights and as I say, unpacking some really interesting, I think, mind-bending kind of paradigm shifting concepts. So if people want to find out more about you, Radhika, what's the best way to connect?
Well, they can download the OHLA toolkit for free. It's on radicalproduct.com and it's on toolkits. Under toolkits, you can find it's called the OHL's toolkit. I now call it OHLA. But you can find that toolkit, download it, and use it. You can also reach out to me on LinkedIn. And so please feel free to try out the toolkit, share with me your experiences or share with me your questions. I'm actually working on that next book about why goals and targets don't work. So if you share with me your experience or what worked and didn't work, it might just make it into the book as a case study.
Wonderful. Or so exciting. And for anyone that's just listening in, be sure to head over to thrivetvshow.com where you'll find all the show notes down below and you'll be able to link through and connect with Radhika. So thank you so much for everything you've shared. If we just wrap up just with, if there's one final thing you'd like to share with our listeners today, what would that be?
I love the whole idea of applying this in our personal lives as well as in business. And, I think for all of us, what really makes us thrive, it's the meaningfulness, right? It's the meaning that, and the sense of purpose. And whether it's at work and, even if we're working in an environment where there are targets, maybe, you're not in a position where you can change that the company operates heavily on targets. That's what everyone is focused on. But you can still use this approach to reframe things as a puzzle for yourself, reframe the business problem as a puzzle for yourself. You can do this within your sphere of control so that you can make work less soul-sucking and more fun for yourself so that you can thrive at work.
I love it. We need more fun, more joy, more connection, I think, in everything we do. So thank you once again. Such a joy to hear your insights. Thanks so much to everyone that's tuned in. That's another episode of the Thrive TV show. Go out and thrive.
Thank you for listening to the Thrive TV Show with Lauren Parsons. Visit thrivetvshow.com to access the show notes and discover our fantastic bonus content. And be sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next inspiring episode.